Welcome back to Sledgehammer Horror, guys. I am Ken Sledge, and let's talk horror. Now, today I'm joined by the amazing Stephen Harrison. Steve, how you doing today, man?
Everybody, what's going on? Doing better than better than it sounds like a lot of people across the world right now, and good spirits, and trying to send that energy back to them as Miss America as that sounds.
Right? But that's what we're here for, man, to try to spread positivity um and speaking of being positive, this is our second attempt at this episode, guys. We did an episode and we just couldn't get the audio right, so we said, you know what, we're not going to be fake about it. We're just going to stop. We're going to redo it so everything is genuine. So before we actually get started, for those of you that don't know Steve, I would like for you to get to know him a little bit. As a kid, he always wanted to be on the stage, and at 23, he decided it was time to try. And for the first time in 2017, he did stand up. Now, what was it like for you to actually get into stand up and start performing?
It was cool, man. It was always. I remember being in fifth grade, and my best friend, thankfully, I can say one of my best friends, John, who is now an improv comic in Austin, Texas. I remember we had this project where we had to write what our occupation, dream job was someday, and he wrote stand-up comic, and that's the first time I really thought like, wow, could I do something with comedy? Like, could I get paid to do that? And
Mhm.
then had kind of the epiphany when I woke up in the middle of the night one time in high school when I was watching couldn't get back to bed, so I put on Richard Pryor live in 1979, and just the way that his presence commanded the stage, it was just cool to witness that. And I was like, I'd love to jump in and do this, and so much has changed even since 2017 doing comedy. But it was just the drive to have fun with the audience, but also the I like the memorization kind of to it, because every comic who's like, I can go out there and just riff with the best of them. Yeah, but there's a part of it, at least, that you're going out there doing from memory. So it's a
Mhm.
challenge to me also, but I it's just I get that I feed off of the response from the audience. It is like a drug, the way they say that.
Mhm. What's and you always want more. You always want more. So I definitely understand where you're coming from there because once you get it, you want to keep it going. And to
Yes.
to build on top of it, in 2019, you started a podcast doing comedy, sports, a little bit of everything. So, what made you decide from going to being on the stage to being behind the mic and wanting to do a podcast about these same type of things?
That was one of those things that, and my mom always said growing up, I was a baseball player, but also I like football. And I thought that I would get into doing that as long as I could. And then just got to high school and was like, wow, I am losing that energy. And it had to do probably with, some other things getting in the way at that time as a high schooler. But I always remember my mom saying growing up that I don't know if you are going to be one of those athletes out there in the field, but you will definitely have a place somewhere in the press box. I know that you could call these games, do something like that. And that was sort of the thought process when I got into doing podcasts, but it was nice because it was a little bit more. Remember, it was just kind of being developed at that time. Podcasting was just taking off in 2019, and building up the ideas for the 2 years before that until I got into it. But I just said, yeah, I can do this, and it can be more loose. It's not going to be, the TV speak, the corporate kind of, okay, you say this and then you say this. That's what I liked about it, is I could be free. And I started doing podcasts for musicians only. And I said, that's cool, but I'd like to branch out and do a little more and just welcome any type of guest onto the show. And it just stuck. And I'm happy to say that I'm now past my 30th episode, which it would, some people, they'd be like, wow, only 30 episodes and you've been doing it since 2019. But I don't do them every month, every week. And that only show that I do that now is every Monday afternoon at 4. I do my sports podcast called the Post Game Podcast, or Post Game Show. As a lot of people will call it, but I don't get same thing there. I just try and, it's sports and humor, but it's not all, okay, you're going to stand here and you're going to be a prop here. I just couldn't
Right.
get into that ever. God bless Brandy because she's my girlfriend who's an actress who's been on this show before. She's definitely, I think, a lot more patient than I am. So she could thrive in that stuff. But I don't know. For me, I always felt a little bit more like I want to be able to have my own creative, the flexibility with it.
Right. And I do have all the links to the podcast and everything down in the description as well as in 2022, Can't Be Bothered, your first stand-up comedy show. The stand-up album was released.
Yes.
So, you have your own album, you have your podcast. Are you still doing live shows too?
Yes. This year, actually, people thought for a bit there, some people were hitting me up asking me if I was doing them. And I am. I actually had to take a little bit of time off this year for Brandy and I are getting ready to move.
Mhm.
So that has been consuming a lot of my year. But the last time I hit the stage was in January, and it was cool. It was the first time I ever went to Flappers in California and did that. And it was just a room full of comics on a Monday, which is that kind of stuff is cool. But I just, when it comes to doing these shows, I do get some sort of rush from producing my own shows, and that's been a work in progress. So Wildcard Entertainment, the company that I have, I officially it's called Wildcard Arts and Entertainment. That will be bringing original shows back for the first time since 2020 because I was doing Mike in Richmond every week. Or I think it was every other week, but that got halted because of COVID. But now I'm going to be doing another festival. Happy to report soon enough here. So details are coming up with that, and it'll be all I could say is it'll be up around the DC area. So stay tuned because
Mhm.
I'm very excited to drop that news. But the next time I will be hitting the stage is coming up this month. Going to DC actually tomorrow, and I'm going to try and drop it and do a mic. But I'm definitely at a place called the Whiskey Cellar in New York, which is going to be on Halloween. And I think there's another show before that in my area in Virginia, in Charlottesville,
Okay.
coming
Well,
up a couple days before that.
yeah, and like I said, I got all his links down in the description as well. So the best way to stay up to date on where these shows are going to be taking place and how you can be a part of those is by following him on social media. So make sure not only are you subscribing to the podcast and checking out the album, make sure you're following him on social media so that way you can stay up to date on everything Steve has coming up for us in the future. Now,
Yes.
you're in order for you to be a part, and obviously something I want to talk about is Harrison the Ghost. That's something
Oh
cool
yeah.
you've done voiceover work on. So before we talk about why you're here, can you tell us a little bit about Harrison the Ghost?
Yeah, man, that is the guy who does that is a very cool. His name is Jimmy, and he started that show, I believe 2015 originally, and then brought it back. And I got into that's one of those things that changed since I got out of high school, and the last 10, 15 years is amazing to see what's happened with radio. But I always wanted to do something with that where I could try being a DJ. And I did that in 2019. I lived in a small town in Virginia called Stanton, but it was cool because I got to work at this radio station and do the University of Virginia and Virginia Tech football and basketball games and call those and also do some classic rock radio DJing. And that was a dream job for sure. The pay for it, a little bit different story with the dream pay, but it was cool because I'd always wanted to try my hand in it, and I got on there and was able to do some voiceover work. Actually, my boss at the time, who was a past since, but cool woman named Cass, she was like, "Yeah, you have a voice for radio," and she taught me the way to, when you're selling something like in a world where doom destroys everything, whatever your line is that you're reading, that you have to have, the inflection and all that kind of stuff down. So I tried a couple of local ads in Virginia, and then fast forward, I meet Brandy a year later in 2020, and we're talking to each other, and she's like, "Yeah, I've done a lot of voiceover work, but I think you'd like this guy Jimmy who does this show." And he was looking for something that was like Scooby Doo, kind of themed, where I would do that, like those meddling kids, one of those voices, and I was like, hell yes, I will be a part of this, because that was also like, wow, I somebody wants me to do I play an announcer on one of these shows that I grew up watching as a kid, and that was cool because I never really gotten to try it in the cartoon format, but I grew up watching, you know, Adult Swim and King
Yeah.
of the Hill and all those shows. So it was like, okay, this is my chance to try that, and I'm trying to branch out with it because, like I said, Brandy is my girlfriend, is the acting side. I'm kind of more of like the radio podcasting. Stand up is where I meet in the middle because I get out there and show my face and not behind the computer screen.
Right. Well, and I think it'd be cool because we grew up in an age where radio was everything. So
Yeah,
being able to be on the radio and do stuff on the radio, even though we're a little older now and radio's not what it used to be, that's still something we've dreamed of since we were children. So to be
very
able to
true.
have that opportunity, to go in there and that to me, it'd be a VJ, a voice jockey. You know what I mean? Like that's something to me that I've always thought was really, really cool. So you've gotten to live that dream, which I think is super dope. Now horror movies, obviously, if you're doing something like Harrison the Ghost, horror is something, and Brandy, like I said, she's a huge horror fan as well. So I know horror is important to you. So now, Steve, I would like to know how it started. So we're going to go back to the past and talk about what got you started in the horror genre, your first horror movie. And Steve, the first horror movie you watched was?
So the first one that I remember watching was I will admit all the way through it was a different one that I had told you originally. It was Jaws, but the one that I remember, like the first official horror movie, I don't unofficially Jaws is one, but is The Shining,
Mhm.
and that one was my sister was a little bit still is a little bit older than me. It sounded like Mitch Hedberg, where the guy's like every I look older in that photograph. Everybody looks older in photographs, but yeah, my older sister, she wanted to watch The Shining with my dad and was reading the book. And I remember he said it's funny enough because it's the first time I ever remember hearing about Johnny Carson because he said, "Here's Johnny, here's Johnny." I was like, "What is he talking about?" And then years later, I see The Shining all the way through, and it struck me because of the way my mom was describing the book, which I'm reading currently. I've tried once before, but I'm trying again to read that book all the way through. A long book for sure. It's just so much different than the movie. And I
Mhm.
was fascinated by Stanley Kubrick. I mean, it just easily sucked me in. And that's horror is one of those things that you can, like comedy, I think you can get entertained by it so easily. And it was hard not to, like growing up around DC, that's where the Exorcist steps are. So it's cool to be able to like be that close to it and then go out to Brandy and she's near, all the California has everything.
Yeah. Well, and like you're talking about with The Shining, it's one of those movies that especially you watch it as a young boy, and then the older you get and the more you see it, the more that things sink in and you realize what they really are and what they're all about. So we
Yes.
know you were young when you watched it. You were with your dad and your sister, but do you remember which scene it was that affected you the most?
The it's one that people the one that scared me the most I remember was the near the very end where she's running through the hotel and there's the random it's so random, it's the guy in the bear suit, and just any scene that had also the guy who's like holding the drink up, the old guy, great party, isn't it? That just because at first you're watching it like the first time through, I didn't really, I was like, oh, that's a ghost clearly, but when I watched it again it just shook me because it's like you're seeing how much Jack Nicholson's character is truly internally tortured. And
Mm-hmm.
that's just I don't know why that part stuck out to me when she's running through the hotel at the end, but also I've got unofficially, I don't know if it's the because always, there's been the JFK conspiracy theory, but I also got sucked into, I noticed all the stuff that had to do with the moon landing
Yeah.
that he drops in that movie because number one, he has the carpet that they do the overhead shot of Danny on that when they zoom out, it's to scale NASA. The
Mhm.
the grounds that you could go onto if you did an aerial view of NASA. So that would just also challenged my brain watching that movie. But I could see where people, if they're just strictly by the book, they read Stephen King's version and they're like, well, this movie didn't do it justice. Like my mom. I mean,
Yeah.
she couldn't stand Shelley Duvall as the wife in that, but I think they all serve their purpose. And the
Mhm.
kid, Danny, I mean, he sold the shit out of his parts.
Yeah. Oh, and
Oh,
like I said, the part where he's riding the tricycle through the hotel, like even just the sound of that, like that just sticks with you forever. And
oh,
it is a movie that I feel like gets better with age. Um, and
yes.
it's a movie that's full of very iconic scenery. We talked about which scene affected you the most, but what would you say your favorite scene from The Shining is?
I love at the end when he knew my dad didn't tell me how it happens, but when we were watching it for the first time, he was like, "Oh, Danny's gonna get him," something to that effect. And I loved it when you can just see Jack Nicholson is finally comes out of the possession and he's like, "Oh no, I can't, my tracks are messed up. How am I going to get out of the maze?" I love that because I was like, "Yes, Danny got him." But I also I thought it was funny because one time I was watching The Shining and it was late night and I was the only one awake in the house, and the this guy was talking about when he saw the movie in the theater in 1980, and his name is Lloyd, and he said when he was in the bar and Jack Nicholson said hi Lloyd, he like jumped up to the ceiling out of his seat. But that scene always stuck with me because it was just like you can truly see him going mad, but I also look at it like maybe he was to that at that moment truly the evil had taken over and he was in hell and everything was just an illusion surrounding him. I've heard that theory at least about that movie thousands of times, like a lot of other theories.
Right. And, I often ask because uh, sequels, requels, prequels, it's all kind of the rage right now in Hollywood. And we did get Dr. Sleep in 2011. Are you a fan of Dr. Sleep?
Dr. Sleep, I don't know if I have seen that. Is that the newest one of that series, the Shining, they kind of turned it
Yep.
into one?
It's
Yeah, I
it's
have
the
not.
sequel. It's the sequel to The Shining. It's Danny when he's grown up.
I've seen, yeah, just trailers, but I've never watched that all the way through. And most people were like, I watched it and it was underwhelming. Now I would give it a try though. I must admit, I've not seen it though.
It's my favorite horror sequel of all time.
Is it
That's
really?
it is. That's how much I love this movie. It's to me, and I know it's blasphemous to say, but I actually like Doctor Sleep more than I like The Shining. The performances in it are fantastic. There's genuine heartbreaking moments throughout the film that has to deal with children. It has one of the best villains of all time with Rose the Hat. They introduced a new young character that has The Shining, Abra, and I think she is fantastic in the film. Um, I cannot recommend Doctor Sleep enough. I think it's very close to a perfect movie.
That because when I heard Doctor Sleep for a second there, I was thinking it might have been the a sequel written about Doctor Strangelove, one of the early Stanley Kubrick
Yeah,
classics. But I truly believe that Stanley Kubrick just I know he didn't like Stephen King, so I think he did that movie the way he did to annoy him, but he also wanted to just try his hand at mastering horror. But there are some sequels that really in horror it's rare that live up to it, but it's that one from what I'm hearing it's worth watching at least, so I'm not going to count it out until I see it.
I definitely think you should check it out. I think it's phenomenal. I still watch it probably 5, 6 times a year. That's how much I love that movie. It's Mike Flanagan is one of my favorite directors, and when he does Stephen King work, he really, really does very well. So I definitely think it's a film you should check out.
There's and Brandy and I thought this would be a cool idea when I because she grew up near where so the movie Jaws actually was influenced by Stephen King's first movie, which is called Duel, which is about a guy who's going cross country on a business trip, and a trucker is harassing him the whole movie. And that's I've always kind of like wondered if I should. I've counted it unofficially as a sequel in horror, but off the top of my head, I can't think of a lot of sequels in horror that are successful. Like I know they did. The Exorcist has had every idea stressed before, but one of the ones that was didn't get enough credit but could have been better was Jaws 2, but I don't think that one is near it's just not as good as what I'm hearing about Doctor Sleep as
I
in
love
terms of
Jaws 2 though
delivery.
too. I got to throw that out there. I think Jaws
Yeah,
2 is fantastic. One of the most underrated. Now Jaws 3 and 4 I could live without, but Jaws 2 I had a lot of fun with that movie. Like a lot of fun. And when you have all the kids out after the stuff goes down, like Jaws 2 is a great follow up to Jaws.
it is, and honestly, I think my dad and I, when I watched it for the first time, or one of the first couple times I saw it, he was like, "Yeah, I remember being in the theater, and I actually was like, this isn't as, oh, everything being used again. I like that, but it got to the part. The only time when he wasn't sold was just with the helicopter. But I thought that was so cool as a kid. I was like, God, that's nature right there, taking care
Yeah.
of us like we're the fleas shaking us off.
Right. Well, I mean, and for Jaws, The Shining, these things to come at you at the same time. These are two iconic movies that are still tossed around today as some of the greatest horror movies of all time. And we know that that's how horror started for you. But I do want to throw you a little bit of a curveball here for a second, Steve. My little buddy Ghostface is here, and he has a question for you. What's your favorite
Yes.
scary movie, Steve? What is your favorite horror movie of all time?
Ooh. Oh, that's such a good question. God, I have to say, just because of the story behind it, and also my mom's story personally going to see it, I have to say the Exorcist. I have to select that also because I love the director William Friedkin. Unfortunately, I think he just passed this year, but did the French Connection. I mean,
Yeah.
iconic. And the Exorcist. It's just because number one, the Linda Blair, such an interesting person, and you wouldn't think that she would dated Rick James of all people, but just what it did, the way it affected her life, and then in a way, the way that it affected people across the world. Nothing like that had been done before, and also,
Right.
filmed a couple of hours from where I grew up. But my mom lived in, she grew up in New York at the time, and she went to, it was Connecticut, I believe, at Stamford, Connecticut. She had to sneak over there to go see the movie because she was too young, and went with her sister, and they were watching it like, what in the world are we seeing? But I mean, even for today's standards, that movie holds up because you could see the touch of classic cinema on it, but it's also like, this, it didn't look like something that would be hard to change, if you just like the styles of the 70s, if you just switched it to modern day. But the first time I watched Jaws, I remember being just as shook up. And the part with Ben Gardner, my mom always is like, it's when that movie's on TV, she's like, "Oh, look away, Steven," because the first time I watched it with her, she remembers I was scared to death of that part. And I find it so interesting that scene was added at the very end of filming, and they filmed it in one of, like, I think the producer's pool. They just dumped milk in it. It's so crazy how impactful it became. And Jaws
Right.
has some good stuff to it also. There's a weird. I'm one of those people that's into those murder shows. My mom is definitely a levels past me because she's more interested than I am in forensics, but she likes that 48 hours type stuff. But there's a picture in that movie of a girl who, because my mom actually had a friend who was an extra on the set of Jaws, because she liked marine biology and just saw an ad in the paper or something like that. But there's also a girl who, when they had the people coming into the island for the 4th of July, who was an extra, turns out she was a victim of a serial killer in that area at that time. And it's
Damn.
become one of those things that just like I research sometimes at 2 a.m. like, wow, that, and they caught her on film by accident because they matched her up to the profile of a missing person. It's just that kind of stuff. How could you not pay attention to a movie like that with those stories? But I just maybe it's me appreciating classic cinema too.
Right. And, like I said, these movies made us who we are. And if you hadn't seen those movies then, maybe me and you wouldn't be sitting here talking about this now. But man, before I let you go, we always bounce back to the same question, Steve. We're going to go back to, I'm sorry, The Shining, and we're going to rank this movie on a skull count. Now, we're not ranking it on acting, production, score, direction, nothing like that. What we're doing is ranking The Shining on how much it affected you on your first viewing. So 0 skulls being not effective, 5 being extremely effective. You can use half and quarter skulls anywhere in the middle. Steve, what would your ranking of The Shining be?
Ooh, very close to a 5. I got to do the fort ranking because that is it's hard to unsee some movies, but The Shining was the first where it really uh, I truly considered it watching a horror movie all the way through. I had seen The Silence of the Lambs, which is sort of like touches of that, and the Jaws, like we had mentioned. But I did see The Shining before The Exorcist, and I have to say, because it was hard to unsee, stuff like Dick Halloran's character, the axe at the end, and just the way that he goes mad and the scene with it's crazy because you could say that maybe the scariest part of that movie is nothing violent, nothing like that. It's when she's reading the all work and no play,
Mm-hmm.
the script that he had been supposedly writing, and how he just creeps up on her. I think that's what's Stanley Kubrick had an image of mind of Jack Nicholson, like he has the face to sell this. Or also
Yeah.
when he's wearing the sweater, the iconic close up where he's just, like looking at them out at the maze. But I'd have to go as close to a 5 as possible. That movie shook my life, like you said, and never really saw filmmaking the same, honestly.
Right. And even like the overhead shots, everything like that. The Shining is such a fantastic movie with a great cast. Another movie, like I said at the beginning, it aged really well. And something else I said at the beginning that I want to reiterate now, guys, because we're at the end of the third act. The credits are about to roll and the curtain's about to drop. But before that happens, make sure you're subscribing to the podcast. Make sure you're following Steve on social media so you can stay up to date on all the shows he has coming up for us here in the future. Steve, please don't go anywhere. I got a couple more questions for you. Um, Everybody else, if you haven't already, please like and subscribe. It helps the channel more than you know. And follow Sledgehammer Horror on social media. All our links are in the description as well. But until next time, keep talking horror, stay what you are, and we'll see you guys soon.